Hello and welcome to TAA Conversations on Art and Peace. I'm Sam Lohman, president of the Art Association. Today, I have the privilege of introducing a truly distinguished voice in the world of art history and visual culture, Professor Rico Franses. Professor Franses was associate professor in the Department of Fine Art and Art History at the American University of Beirut, where he also served as founding director of its university art galleries. He earned his PhD in art history from the Corto Institute of Art in London and holds both a BA in philosophy and an MA in art history from McGill University. He has also taught at the Australian National University, Pratt Institute, and held a fellowship at Harvard University. Over his career, he has taught thousands of students, delivered lectures around the world, and published widely, including his acclaimed book, Donor Portraits in Byzantine Art and Essays on Psychoanalysis, Deleuze, Lacan, and Byzantine Visual Theory. We are honored to welcome him as the inaugural speaker in the TAA Lectures on Art and Peace series. This five-part live Zoom series asks a simple but profound question. What does art have to say about peace? Welcome, Professor Franses.
Hello, Sam. I'm delighted to be here. Very much looking forward to our collaboration, and thanks very much for the invitation to do this interview. Absolutely looking forward to it.
Rico, you've taught all over the world, and your work connects art, history, and deep ideas about how we see and feel. What first led you into this field, and was there a moment you realized art would be the focus of your life's work?
When I tell people I'm an art historian, they almost always assume that I'm an artist as well. And they always ask me, oh, and do you make art? Do you produce art? Do you actually make art? But in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. I have absolutely no talent at all. In fact, I almost had to drop out of biology class because I couldn't draw a test tube, literally. But on the other hand, even though I was useless at art, I was always fascinated by it. And I was always friendly with the kids who actually could draw. I always was very careful to sort of maneuver myself so that I could sit behind them in class and glance over their shoulders to see what they were doodling and sketching. And that pattern continued. I wasn't good at drawing, but I was good at looking, at analyzing what the other kids were doing and trying to work out how they did what they did, so to speak. And by the time I was a teenager, I knew that I wanted to be involved with this miraculous thing called art. It took me several years to work my way around to admitting that art was actually what I wanted to study, but eventually I got there.
At TAA, we believe art can open minds and help people connect. Do you have any personal experiences where you first began to see a relationship between art and peace?
Well, in fact, again, I have to go back to my adolescence, so to speak. So I grew up in South Africa during the apartheid era. And the time when I was growing up was also the worst period of racist discrimination and oppression. And as I finished school at the age of 17, I was drafted into the South African Army almost without knowing it, right? I finished school, I was happy to be finished school, and then the next thing I knew, I was taken into the army. And this was at just the moment when an internal revolution erupted against the racist regime. And it was this revolution that would eventually lead to the downfall of the government. So just at this particular moment, the country was literally on fire. The towns were burning, the villages were burning, the countryside was burning. There were riots all over the place. And the army, of which I now found myself a member, was called out to try to quell the uprising. So there I was, a new conscript, and I was sent out one night to stand guard or to guard a regional airport. And when my turn came around to do my shift, I was driven in a Jeep down to the far end of the runway, given a cartridge full of live, high-caliber bullets, and told to shoot anyone I saw. Literally, that was it. Shoot anyone you see. The Jeep then drove away, and I was left in the pitch darkness, knees shaking, staring at the bullets as jets roared in for landing just above my head. And then as my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, I began to realize that I wasn't just in a field, but that there were some dilapidated shacks around me. And then it slowly dawned on me that I was standing in the middle of an old abandoned fun fair from the 1940s. I could see the crumbling Ferris wheel, I could see the various stalls, and the old Coca-Cola signs banging in the wind. And then, as I understood where I was, suddenly the fear disappeared and I was transported into this magical world of fantasy. It wasn't what I would now call art, but it certainly wasn't war either. And in that instant, I also became aware of this gaping contradiction between the war I was living and the world of the imagination, which I glimpsed for a minute in the fun fair and which I now find in art. It wasn't just that these were two different experiences, right? I was aware, sort of philosophically, if I can use that word, even at 17, that there was this absolute incompatibility between war and art, that there was in each of them something that contradicted the other. I felt it in my bones and body as I was caught there at that moment, trapped between both. I've since spent decades thinking about why this incompatibility exists. But that was the first moment when I was launched into the jaws of that contradiction, this relationship between art and peace.
Amazing. To that young man placed in a situation that none of us should ever be placed in, the visual surrounding that you were engulfed with somehow transported you and actually led you to pose a question that you've been trying to answer for your entire life, it appears. How fascinating. And also a testament to the power of art, because I am confident that those that designed the fun park, and certainly those that made the industrial designs for Coca-Cola and so forth, somehow they believe they are working in the art world. And here is an incredible insight as to the real life impact it had on yourself. Thank you for sharing that with us. Very, very interesting. So you're about to lead TAA lectures on art and peace in a series to which you have given the title, What Does Art Have to Say About Peace? What can you tell us about these lectures and what can people expect from them?
So, just to start with the title, what art has to say about peace, or as I sometimes phrase it, what art thinks about peace and its absence. Now, I know that that's an unusual phrase, an unusual sentence that might sound a bit odd to people, so let me explain. So it's unusual in two aspects. First of all, we don't commonly say art thinks something about something else, right? It's usually the artist. So we say Leonardo da Vinci or Picasso thinks so and so about something. And usually that information about what they think about something is derived from their writings in the case of Leonardo da Vinci or some interview that Picasso did or something like that. But in fact, I actually do think that individual artworks do express an opinion or make an argument or take up a position. And that's my second unusual point. Usually we think that pictures are simple, right? Think about selfies. Everyone's taking selfies all over the place, right? And, this is me in front of a building, and this is me in front of the restaurant where I'm eating food or something like that. And we have this idea about pictures that they're simple in the sense you just look and you know what it means. There's no hard work. You look at a picture, you know exactly what it's getting at. And we also tend to think that that's how pictures are different from books, right? You just look and you don't have to read. But in fact, with all due respect to the billions of people taking selfies, I think that's wrong. Pictures on, I'm not saying that I think that taking selfies are wrong. I'm just saying that this notion of pictures being simple is wrong. Pictures are much more like books than we realize, and we have to read pictures slowly, just like books. And when we look at pictures in detail, we discover that they often do, as I say, take up an expression, take up a position, express an opinion, make an argument. So that's what I mean by the phrase, what art thinks about peace. So we're looking at pictures to see what attitudes they adopt towards peace. And the results, I think, will shock and surprise you once we get going on the subject.
And I
So
think that you, in your groundbreaking book, Donor Portraits, you vividly illustrate a groundbreaking theory of donor portraits versus captive portraits. And perhaps that somehow dovetails into your analysis today of bringing that and applying it to, as you say, selfies. for instance. It's not just the subject, it's the context. And who better than yourself to take us on that voyage of analysis? Sorry to interrupt. It's just I was fascinated by your book, and I think that it truly is an incredible work. And to have that background and share it with us and apply it as you most certainly will is a true privilege. Privilege.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I really appreciate that. And it's funny that you draw that connection between my book where I'm dealing with portraiture. And again, portraiture, we tend to think is just like, oh, it's nothing, right? Oh, it's a picture of a person. But in fact, once and it works on the same level of recognition. Oh, I recognize that person, and that's all there is to say about it. But in fact, once you start digging around, especially inside the image, you find the image has been carefully constructed and carefully contrived to make a point about something. And so that's that same attitude that I want to bring to say, well, what is art saying about peace? It's not just, oh, here are people doing peaceful things. It's like, what kind of thing do they think that peace is that's being expressed in art? And
So,
so,
yes.
carry on, carry on.
In this series, you include works from diverse parts of the world and time periods, from ancient paintings to modern ones. Why is it important to take that wide view when talking about art and peace?
So to give you an idea, as you've just started mentioning, of what material we'll cover. So art has been thinking about peace almost right from the beginning, right? From 5,000 years ago in Egypt and Mesopotamia, we have images of war and peace. And so for the first lecture, that's where we'll start. We'll start with these ancient images. But additionally, we'll also start learning the process of how to read images like a book, so to speak, how to analyze them to see how they're constructed to convey a particular message or opinion. And for the rest of the lectures, we will follow these two tracks in parallel. We'll be analyzing images in detail, which I have to say very few people do. And we'll be seeing what those images say about war and peace. And then in subsequent lectures, we'll look at the very many different kinds of peace that art tells us about, what they are, how they feel, and how perhaps to achieve them. We'll be looking, for example, at Buddhist and Eastern art here, but we'll also see how quickly the story of peace and its absence becomes very complex, because quite often an image will look and feel gloriously peaceful, and yet when you really analyze it in depth, it may turn out to have disturbing undercurrents. Similarly, the opposite may be true. An image may be violent on the surface and surprisingly tranquil below. So we'll be looking in detail at each of these aspects. And for the last lecture, especially, I'm looking forward to the discussion I'm sure we will have about what art will have taught us and the conclusions we will have reached about this fugitive, transient thing called peace. And Sam, if I can just carry on, just to answer your question specifically over there, this question about why is it important to look at all of these areas.
Please do.
There is not a culture anywhere in the world that has not thought about or wrestled with this issue of peace. And art is, as I was just saying, art is that wrestling with the issue. Art is the attempt to think it through. So the more we look at this kind of art and the more familiar we become with how complex the issue of peace is and why it's so, the more familiar we become with how complex this issue of peace is and why it's so difficult to achieve. Art is teaching us, explaining to us what the issues and difficulties surrounding peace are. The more of it we can see from the more places and epochs and cultures, the better we grasp how fragile it is and perhaps, if we're being optimistic, how best we can cultivate it and how best we can keep it alive.
And of course, that goes to the essence of the Art Association. Our mission is to encourage peaceful engagement through art in all its forms. And of course, gathering together to learn on the basis of the art and through a exercise, which in and of itself is an engagement surrounding art, a peaceful engagement, is going to be fantastic. So we have members of the TAA International Community of Artists for Peace, along with TAA friends and supporters watching from all over the world. What would you like to say to them as they join this global conversation on art and peace and the lectures as they roll out?
So, in fact, I think we're looking at art from all over the world, and we're going to have people joining us from all over the world, and that only enhances the conversation, right? Peace is not one thing; it plays out differently in each context, and every single person's individual experience. In a sense, art is already individual experience of thinking through. And then to bring other voices in from all around the world to help us interpret this. Every single class I've ever done is always enriched by people who suddenly come in from somewhere else and they're saying, you know, from in the place where I live, this is the way we might look at this. And then I'm always, for all my decades of teaching, I'm always saying, it's like, you're kidding. I never thought of that before. And, I know these images incredibly well. I've been living with them for 40, 50 years. And yet there's always something new that's brought in from people from all different cultures and all these different viewpoints. So really looking forward to that.
Professor Frances, thank you for sharing your time, your intellect, and your vision with us. TAA Lectures on Art and Peace will be a unique journey, and we are so proud to launch it with you. To our viewers, registration is now open at www.theartassociation.ch. Whether you are an artist, student, educator, or someone curious about the intersection of art and ideas, we invite you to join us and to be part of a global conversation about how art can shape our understanding, experiences, and aspirations for peace. Thank you very much, Professor Frances.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. And I'm really looking forward to this and looking forward to meeting everybody as well who will join us on this journey, this voyage of discovery.
That's a take.